ActionSA has rejected the new cabinet, labelling it a dodgy billion-rand cabinet. The party says it's a bad impression. It creates a bad impression, and any intention and doesn't have intentions of bringing meaningful reform to politics. ActionSA Eastern Cape Provincial leader Athol Trollip joins us now to talk more. Athol, good morning to you and welcome. Your statement of response to the announcement reads, contrary to past commitments by both the President and the DA, the appointment of 32 ministers and 43 deputy ministers shows that when they stand to benefit, their principles soon fall by the wayside. You're essentially saying they betrayed themselves and their voter base, sellouts really. Explain that position to our viewers.
Good morning, Iman. Thanks very much. Well, look, obviously, we're really disappointed that we have such a bloated cabinet. It's clearly all about appeasement. The president said that at the start of his announcement last night. So there are two issues here, really. First of all, we at last have a cabinet, so now government can get to work, which we're happy about. The second issue is that we can't afford a cabinet that size. And essentially what we've seen is that Cyril Ramaphosa has prepared to bloat his cabinet to appease all the parties of the multi-party coalition that have come together to form a government. And he doesn't trust any one of those partners to run a department on their own. So you've seen that he has put in sometimes two deputy ministers in watchdog capacity. And we believe that's just completely profligate, and we can't afford that. And unfortunately, in life, when you make choices like that around appeasing people, it's never the best policy to get things done, but there is always an opportunity cost to making that kind of appeasement. And the opportunity cost is that that cabinet is going to cost billions of rands to run at the cost of running departments effectively and getting the job done in South Africa.
And the opportunity cost would also then, play itself out in how effective they are able to be. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult. As I described the composition of this cabinet, wherever there's a non-ANC minister, there are a couple of ANC watchdog deputy ministers. And I think that's going to make it very difficult. It's going to make it cumbersome. And I think the decision-making process is going to be very cumbersome in that cabinet. And I think it's going to be a government that's going to be monolithic. It's going to be very slow to react. And unfortunately, that's just the antithesis of what South Africa needs. South Africa needs a lean, lithe government that is able to respond quickly and efficiently and effectively. And I think that this bloated cabinet is not going to be able to do that. But time will tell. We have chosen to be in the opposition benches. We are right in the middle between this multi-party coalition government and the so-called progressive caucus, which actually is a regressive caucus. So we find ourselves in the middle there. We've committed to being a constructive opposition that will hold the government to account where we have to do that and support the government where we can. So that is the role that we're going to play over the next 5 years, and we'll watch the performance of this cabinet very, very closely.
We'll circle back to the role that you'll play in the opposition in just a moment. Why do you call them the regressive caucus?
Well, progressive, I think whoever named it didn't really understand what progressive means. This so-called progressive caucus is anti the Constitution. They're anti-private ownership of land. They have some really regressive ideas. They also, many of them are Marxists and communists. And we've seen what Marxism and communism has done all over the world. So for all intents and purposes, we believe they're more regressive than progressive.
Let's talk about, the question of trade-offs or betrayal, essentially. And on the issue of a bloated cabinet, we understand historically where the Democratic Alliance and other parties have stood around editing that cabinet down, making it a much leaner. And against those criticisms of the composition of what is now an extended cabinet, Helen Ziller said on our program this morning on the very question that they didn't know how big the cabinet would ultimately be, just the positions that they had agreed to. Do you buy that?
I don't buy that at all, and I'll tell you why. First of all, ActionSA was part of the multi-party charter prior to the election results of the 29th of May. And in that multi-party charter, we agreed along with the EFF, the IFP and the DA, amongst others, that we should trim down the cabinet to no more than 18 to 20 positions and have no deputy ministerial positions. Now, if Helen Zille says she didn't know that they were going to be offered deputy ministerial positions, I don't think she's being quite honest in that regard. So from going to saying no deputy ministers to accepting 6 deputy ministers, that's quite a big move. So we believe that many of the parties that are now in this multi-party government, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, and the DA, for example, that were multi-party charter members, they've gone against their own commitments of cutting down the size of cabinet, making it more strategic, more lithe, as I said, and lean. They've gone completely against that. They've all accepted positions now in the cabinet, which has made the cabinet bloated because Cyril Ramaphosa said himself that he had to accommodate those partners. So they have gone against their requests and their campaigns, in fact, for Cyril Ramaphosa to reduce his cabinet.
We've had an analyst on just before you came on, Athol, to say that we have to be appreciative of the context in which South Africa finds itself. There had to be trade-offs made. We find ourselves in a very different democratic and political paradigm in South Africa. And this is an invidious job the president would have had in any case, with the numbers that the ANC now produced after this last election, to come up with not only a collaborative government, a government, purely of national unity, but also to be able to do all of the appeasement that it takes to get to a place where we can have a cabinet that functions at all. Do you have any appreciation for perhaps what might have been a very, very difficult task in managing everyone's expectations and demands?
Man, absolutely. There's no doubt that this kind of cabinet has been put together under tremendous pressure. It's a whole new paradigm in South African politics. So we do have appreciation for that. However, having said that, we really don't think it's prudent to retread ministers like Bladen Zamandi and Angie Motshekga, ministers that have not performed well in their previous departments for more than a decade. To retread them and put them in other departments, we think is a parlous mistake. Secondly, for having up to 2 deputy ministers, there's absolutely no need for that, even though this is an appeasement cabinet. We believe that Cyril Ramaphosa should have taken a much stronger position and done away with deputy minister posts, and certainly not necessary to have 2 in any department. So we do think that it is profligate and he could have done much better under the circumstances, and we appreciate that they were difficult, but I think he could have done much, much better.
Here's the thing, Athol, finally, South Africans, especially those who live in communities where there isn't service delivery, where things are breaking, kids can't go to school, they may not have documents, a number of different things that translate to a really miserable lived experience, and not even mentioning things like deep malnourishment in your province, for example, where I think 1 in 4, the national average is around 1 in 4, but in Eastern Cape, it's quite profound, the levels of malnourishment. And people just want the business of governance and government to get underway and to work in their interests. You don't believe, though, that in the composition that we do have, that there will be meaningful political reform which could translate into the efficacy of service delivery on the ground. Why not?
Well, we sincerely hope that it will. We are but dubious. And, you used the Eastern Cape as an example. It is a tragic example of maladministration faced with malnutrition and many other socio-economic challenges. But the people of the Eastern Cape still voted for the ANC. So, it's not the composition of the cabinet, it's not the composition of the government that determines how effectively a government works. It's how the leadership of that government drives governance. And we believe that Cyril Ramaphosa has proven in his last term that he was not capable of dealing with those very tragic issues that you now highlighted. And the fact that the people of the Eastern Cape and Limpopo that have the worst socio-economic indexes are still voting for the ANC is an indication that, it's not the government, it's the leadership of the government.
So what happens next? You don't, you talked about the need in your statement following the announcement, the need to crank up the volume of your opposition. There's a certain polarity that's going to be manifest in Parliament going forward, and there'll be minority opposition groups and sort of opposition blocks in Parliament as well. Where do you sit, and how can you make an impact where you are?
Well, as I said, Iman, we sit right in the middle of the multi-party government and the inverted commas progressive stroke regressive caucus of the MK and the EFF. Now, the multi-party government takes up nearly 20% of the seats in Parliament. So that leaves very little space for real opposition, constructive opposition. We don't see that MK and EFF are going to be constructive in their opposition. We've seen how the EFF operated in the last 10 years. It's going to be interesting to see how MK operates now.
Yeah.
But we believe that we have the capacity to be the ballast and in the middle and to hold government to account where we have to and to support them where we can. And that's the role that we've defined for ourselves.
Athol Trollip, Eastern Cape Provincial leader, thank you very much for talking to us this morning, representing ActionSA. Thank you for your time.